Good day, sir. I'm Kamakhala Mokhomi, and I'll be discussing and presenting the Phase 3 database video for Kenny's Automobiles Group. We'll be going through the tables created, the data inserted on tables, as well as the queries implemented. Below are the tables created for employees and the inserted data for employees, the inventory department employees, as well as the logistics department employees. Below here are the implemented queries for the employee table. We'll firstly be demonstrating the light query. As you can see, it runs pretty well. We'll further demonstrate the AND query, as well as the OR query. We'll also be counting the number of employees from the employee table. As you can see, it runs smoothly. Then we'll be displaying the data on the employee table. And next we'll be moving on to the inventory entity, and then this is the table created for inventory. These are the data inserted for the inventory table, and we use the sum aggregate function to calculate the number of available cars. Let's demonstrate the function. As you can see, it works well. And now we'll show the data, all the data for the inventory table. Works well. Moving on to the inventory department, this is the table created for the inventory department and all its variables. This is the data inserted for the inventory department, and we'll be checking all the data for the inventory department. Moving on to the inventory order, this is the table created for inventory order, and this is all the data inserted for the inventory order. For the inventory order, we use the round query to convert the total price of our inventory order to whole numbers. Now let's demonstrate the query. As you can see, it works perfectly well. Now let's view the data for inventory order. Perfect. Moving on to the supplier entity, this is the table created for supplier, and this is the data inserted for the supplier entity. Now we'll be demonstrating the supplier data. Works perfect. Moving on to the vehicle entity, this is the table created for the vehicle entity as well as its variables, and these are the inserted data for the vehicle entity. We'll just be demonstrating the vehicle data. Works perfectly well. And for the vehicle entity, we created an index query. We created an index for the vehicle entity. As you can see, it says the name is already used by an existing object, meaning that the index has already been created. Another one of our queries which deals with the vehicle entity is the sorting query. We'll be demonstrating the sorting query. As you can see, it orders the data via the model year, and if the model year is the same, it'll then move on to order the data by vehicle ID. Moving on to the delivery entity, this is the table created for the delivery entity, and this is the inserted data and we'll be demonstrating the data for the delivery entity. Works well. Moving on to the vehicle order entity, this is a table created for the vehicle order entity, and this is the inserted data for the vehicle orders. We'll be demonstrating the data for the vehicle orders. Works well. Moving on to the logistics department, this is the table created for the logistics department. These are the data inserted for the logistics department, and we'll be demonstrating the logistics department data. Let me insert the data. As you can see, 5 rows have now been inserted. Let me demonstrate again. Now the data has been inserted successfully. Moving on to the subquery that was implemented, we tried to implement the subquery which joins the inventory order to the suppliers in order to show the inventory order on a specific date. Let me demonstrate and show the error we have experienced. Even though we use the slides guided by the slides we received from, as our code was guided by the slides we received, we still experienced an invalid identifier error. Same with the code below, we experienced the same error. This join code was only meant to show the suppliers in our database and not the suppliers outsourced. Moving on to the customer entity, this is the table created for the customers, and these are the data. This is the data inserted for the customer entity. Then we'll demonstrate the data for the customers. Works well. Moving on to the customer purchase info, this is the table created and the variables for the customer. These are the inserted data for the customer purchase info entity, and we'll be demonstrating the customer purchase info data. Works well. Moving on to the customer order entity, this is the table created for the customer orders and its variables. This is the data inserted for the customer order entity. Below is the implemented query for limiting of rows and columns. Let me demonstrate the query. Works perfectly. Now this query deals with limiting rows to process orders made on a specific date. Moving on to demonstrating the data on customer orders. Works well. Then moving on to the round query in order to convert the total price of our inventory order to whole numbers. Works perfectly. Now moving on to demonstrate the customer order data. Works perfectly. Now we're going to explain the subquery, the second subquery which works. Now the last subquery works perfectly. Now the subquery shows all the inventory orders which exceed the average price. Now that is all for our phase 3 database video on the Kenny's automobiles. Thank you, ma'am, for your time.